blood and power. Two obsessions that stalked Henry VIII like ghosts in the corridors of Whitehall until the moment he drew his last breath. It's January 1547. The heart of winter grips England in ice and silence. Behind velvet-draped doors, the once mighty king lies in a towering bed, grotesquely bloated, flesh festering from the inside out. The air in his chamber is thick with incense, not for ceremony, but to mask the stench of a body slowly giving way to rot. His courtiers dare not speak the truth aloud, but they whisper it in corners. The lion is dying. Yet even now, his claws remain sharp. This is no peaceful passing. It's a grim, drawn-out unraveling, the final days of a monarch who built and broke England on a whim, a man who claimed divine right, defied the Pope, and changed the Church forever. A king whose signature could mean a nation's war or a woman's death. But rewind the clock, long before the ulcers, long before the madness. Henry was Europe's golden prince, tall, athletic, striking, a skilled jouster, a composer of music, a poet and a theologian. He was adored not just by his people but by foreign courts. The perfect king in the age of Renaissance. He was the future, vibrant, intelligent and full of promise. So what happened? What transforms a beloved prince into a feared tyrant? What force twists vitality into violence? How does a king become prisoner to his own decaying flesh and mind? This story is not just about 6 wives or royal politics. It's about a man at war with his own body, a mind unraveling in real time, a soul tortured by guilt, by ghosts, and by the very power he once wielded without mercy. As his death looms, we find a king scribbling execution orders with trembling hands, a man both ruler and prisoner, tormented by visions of the past, desperate to control the future. Even in his final hours, Henry VIII tries to rule England from his sickbed, grasping for control while slipping deeper into darkness. But beneath the grandeur, beneath the crown, he is just a man staring down eternity, and the question isn't just how he died, it's how much of him had already died, long before his heart stopped beating. Because this is not just the story of a death, it's the crumbling of a legend, it's the unraveling of a myth, it's the beginning of a power vacuum that would reshape a kingdom and haunt the throne for generations. Welcome to the final days of Henry VIII. Before the blood, before the betrayals, there was brilliance. Henry VIII didn't begin as a tyrant. He began as a dream. Born the second son to King Henry VII, he was never meant to wear the crown. But fate intervened when his elder brother Arthur died young, and destiny handed Henry a kingdom, along with a bride, Catherine of Hay. Aragon, Arthur's widow, at just 17 Henry became king, and for a while there it was glorious. The young monarch dazzled his court. He was tall, over 6 feet, with a muscular frame, auburn hair that shimmered in the sunlight, and piercing eyes that could charm or command. He hunted, danced, debated theology with scholars. He was the living image of the ideal Renaissance ruler. He didn't just wear the crown, he redefined it. Henry was a king who composed music, wrote poetry, and wielded a sword with equal grace. He jousted like a warrior, prayed like a monk, and debated like a philosopher. Foreign ambassadors called him the handsomest prince in Christendom. To his people, he was England's golden hope. But Henry wasn't just a man of beauty and brilliance. He was a king with vision and ambition. He inherited a secure kingdom and dreamed of expanding its glory. He plunged England into war with France, seeking to emulate the military conquests of old. He imagined himself a new Arthur, a new Caesar, a god among men. And yet, beneath that dazzling surface, the seeds of his ruin were already being sown. His obsession with legacy, with leaving behind a male heir, began to consume him. Catherine of Aragon bore him many children, but only one, Mary, survived. As years passed and no son arrived, Henry's anxiety deepened into desperation. He turned to God for answers and thought he heard one. Henry began to believe his marriage was cursed, that Catherine had been his brother's wife and that their union defied divine law. But there was something else too, or rather, someone, Anne Boleyn, Young, educated, and defiantly alluring, Anne refused to be his mistress. She wanted a crown, and Henry, smitten and obsessed, moved heaven and earth to give it to her. What followed would shake Europe to its foundations. When the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine, Henry broke with Rome, a seismic act that transformed England forever. In 1534, he declared himself supreme head of the Church of England. Kings had defied popes before. But Henry rewrote the rules of spiritual authority. He became the law. The boy who had once defended the Catholic Church against Luther was now burning bridges, monasteries, and centuries of religious tradition. But for a time it worked. Anne became queen, and in 1533 she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. No son, no heir, and Henry's patience was already wearing thin. His early reign had been marked by hope and possibility, but as his dreams of dynasty began to fray, so too did the mask of the Renaissance king. Henry grew harder, more paranoid, less forgiving. His court, once a playground of art and intellect, became a battlefield of whispers and alliances, and Anne, once his obsession, would soon become his first royal casualty. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This was still Henry at his peak, admired, feared, unstoppable. He had transformed England's religion, elevated its monarchy, and bent history to his will. This was the king in his prime, but even at the height of his power, cracks were forming. Cracks that would soon split the crown, and the man beneath it. Power made him a legend. Pain made him a monster. By his mid-40s, Henry VIII was no longer the Golden Prince. The jousts had stopped. The songs had quieted. The mirrors had been turned away. What remained was a man in agony, and a king terrified of losing control. It started with an accident. In 1536, during a jousting tournament, Henry was thrown from his horse and crushed beneath it. He was unconscious for 2 hours. Some believe he never fully recovered, not in body and not in mind. From that moment on, the pain never left him. His leg never healed. Ulcers opened like rotting craters. The wound festered, constantly infected, leaking pus that filled entire rooms with the stench of decay. Servants gagged, physicians wept, and Henry so raged. He ballooned in weight, swelling to nearly 400 pounds. He could no longer climb stairs nor ride horses. Mechanical hoists were installed in his palaces to lift his bloated frame from bed to throne. A once vibrant monarch reduced to a wheezing shadow, gasping for breath between fits of fury. But the real damage was inside his head. The pain warped him. Sleep eluded him. Paranoia crept in. The king who once welcomed debate now saw treason in every disagreement. He trusted no one, not his counselors, not his wives, not even his own children. Anne Boleyn, once the love of his life, became the first queen ever executed by an English monarch. Within 3 years of marriage, Henry accused her of adultery, incest, and high treason, charges still debated by historians. The trial was a spectacle, the verdict inevitable. Anne's head rolled, and the crowd cheered in stunned silence. Then came Jane Seymour, demure, obedient, everything Anne wasn't. She gave Henry the one thing no wife had, a son. But the joy was short-lived. Jane died of complications after childbirth, and Henry was never the same again. He mourned her, built her a tomb, called her his true wife. But love, by then, was buried beneath suspicion. His next 3 marriages were a carousel of disaster. Anne of Cleves, divorced for being unattractive. Catherine Howard, beheaded for alleged infidelity. Catherine Parr, survived only by outliving him. Each wife, each scandal, fed the public's fear and the court's frenzy. No one was safe. Henry's temper exploded unpredictably. Ministers who once shaped policy were suddenly dragged to the scaffold. His trusted friend, Thomas More, dead. His right-hand man, Thomas Cromwell, executed after arranging a politically expedient but personally disastrous marriage. Blood spilled like ink across parchment, and every drop darkened the crown. Meanwhile, the king's mind drifted further into darkness. Court records describe episodes of rage, incoherence, even hallucinations. He spoke of ghosts, of wives, enemies, men he'd ordered killed. He woke screaming. He prayed obsessively. Some believed the devil was collecting early, and yet the machinery of the monarchy never stopped. Henry continued signing laws, directing battles, and dictating religious reform, even as he seemed to lose grip on reality. By the early 1540s, Henry was a paradox, feared more than ever, yet visibly, painfully human. Everywhere he went, people watched in stunned horror as the once great king struggled to walk, to speak, to stay conscious. His portrait, once bold and proud, no longer matched the man himself, but power kept him aloft. No one could challenge him, no one dared. So the decline continued, not in sudden collapse, but in slow, merciless descent. And everyone knew the end was coming. The king who once commanded empires could no longer command his own body. It was January 1547. England's monarch lay, trapped in a palace of shadows, a prisoner inside his own decaying flesh. Henry VIII, once the towering force of a nation, had become a grotesque monument to suffering. His leg ulcers, blackened and oozing, emitted a stench so unbearable that even seasoned courtiers recoiled. The king's immense bed, draped in black velvet, sat in a room heavy with incense and dread, a royal chamber turned tomb. Each breath came with a wheeze, each movement a scream. The pain was constant, waves of agony that brought the mighty king to tears. Physicians applied poultices, made of onions, animal fats, and even ground human bone. Desperate remedies from an age with no answers. When that failed, they turned to opium. It dulled his body but blurred his mind. He began to hallucinate. He called out to wives long dead, whispered confessions to men he'd once condemned. His chaplains recorded terrifying moments where Henry swore he saw the faces of the executed at the foot of his bed. Thomas More, Anne Boleyn, Thomas Cromwell. Silent, accusing, unblinking. And all the while the clock was ticking. Outside his bedchamber, the court turned to calculation. Henry had one son, Edward, just 9 years old, too young to rule, and so, behind every bowed head and whispered prayer, there was a plan. Powerful factions, Protestant and Catholic, jostled for control. The Duke of Norfolk, the Seymours, the Reformers, the Conservatives. Each saw opportunity in the king's fading heartbeat, but Henry Keane was not finished. Even as he drifted in and out of lucidity, he insisted on reviewing documents, revising his will, choosing who would rise and who would fall. He signed execution, orders with a hand barely able to grip a quill. His paranoia, now a permanent companion, made him see betrayal in every corner of the palace. One last act of vengeance, Norfolk, the Catholic stalwart, sentenced to die. The axe was sharpened. But fate intervened. Henry died before the order could be carried out. It happened in the early hours of January 28th. No trumpets, no ceremony, just a final wheeze, and then silence. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was summoned to his bedside. The king could no longer speak, so the archbishop asked him, "If you place your soul in Christ's hands, squeeze mine." And with one last flicker of life, Henry squeezed, then he was gone. But his death didn't echo across the land. Not yet. For 3 days his courtiers kept the secret. The news could trigger chaos, power grabs, foreign invasions, civil war. While Henry's corpse decayed in silence, Edward Seymour secured fortresses, silenced rivals, and positioned himself to rule as Lord Protector. Only when the chessboard was safe did the bells of London toll, and the nation learned the lion was dead. But death brought no peace. Henry's body began decomposing at an alarming rate. His coffin, built hastily and reinforced with lead, split. Under pressure, fluids leaked onto the chapel floor. Some said dogs licked the seepage. A final indignity for a king obsessed with legacy. Even his funeral was an illusion. Effigies of Henry were modeled not on the man he became, but the man he once was, youthful, broad-shouldered, majestic. The people wept for that version, never knowing the horror hidden beneath the coffin lid. Henry VIII, king, tyrant, visionary, monster, was laid to rest beside Jane Seymour, the only wife who gave him a son, the only one he never stopped mourning. And as the crypt was sealed, so too was an era, But the consequences were only just beginning. Henry VIII died as he lived, commanding fear, demanding power, and leaving chaos in his wake. But what he left behind was more than a corpse or a crumbling kingdom. He left a myth. To the painters and poets of the Tudor court, Henry became a symbol of unstoppable strength, legs planted wide, arms on hips, gaze unflinching, an image that would outlast the truth by centuries, because the truth was far more complex. Henry had torn England from Rome, built a new church in his own image, and laid the foundations for the English Reformation. He was no theologian, but his ego carved out spiritual authority that kings would cling to long after he was gone. He left behind 3 children, each destined to rule: Edward, the boy king raised by reformers; Mary, the devout Catholic who would burn Protestants at the stake; and Elizabeth, the daughter of the executed Anne Boleyn, who would become the greatest Tudor of them all. Each of them bore Henry's legacy, in name, in blood, and in burden. But the legacy ran deeper. He changed how power worked. He made monarchy personal, visceral, volatile, and terrifying. Under Henry, kings were no longer distant symbols. They were human, flawed, dangerous. He showed the world that a man, not the church, not tradition, could bend a nation to his will. And yet his final years were a slow unraveling. A king once loved, now feared. A ruler once brilliant, now broken. A man who remade England, but couldn't remake himself. Centuries later, historians still argue, was he a reformer or a tyrant? A visionary or a butcher? The answer is yes, he was all of it, and maybe that's why we still remember him, not just for what he did, but for what he became, because Henry VIII wasn't just a king, he was a warning. That no matter how high you rise, no matter how tightly you grip the throne, you can't outrun your body, you can't escape your mind, and even the most powerful man in the world must face the end alone. And in that silence, when the bells stopped, when the torches dimmed, a new England began to breathe, one shaped by fear, by freedom, by fire, but always in the shadow of Henry.